tonight we're going to accomplish 2 objectives. We're going to review Objective 4 from class today and review your chart. So make sure you have that out as we go. And then we will discuss the accomplishments, particularly the Abbasid dynasty, but of both the dynasties. So, in the beginning, just a refresher, there were the first 4 caliphs, which were Abu Bakr, a Sunni, Umar, a Sunni, Uthman, a Sunni, and then Ali, who was a Shia. Remember, he was the son-in-law to Muhammad. And they are generally agreed upon as legitimate. Both Sunnis and Shia recognize their legitimacy as caliphs. Think about what happens to him. So he's related to Muhammad, and what happens to him? He's murdered. And then his son Hassan, who is still a Shia and a descendant of Muhammad, takes control. Then a powerful family in Mecca pressures Hassan to step down, and Hassan agrees, and this clears the way for, this should make you think of the Ummayyads. So the Umayyad dynasty undergoes a period of massive growth, spreading from just the Arabian Peninsula into the Middle East, into North Africa, all the way into Spain. So the Umayyad dynasty steps up after Hassan is pushed aside. So again, remember, this was a wealthy merchant family in Mecca who then was converted upon Muhammad's return from his hijrah and when he came to the Kaaba and smashed the idols. The Umayyads practice massive expansionism, and as a result, Islam itself grows. So both the empire but also the religion. The military conquests are impressive for reasons we talked about with the Islamic military might. They go all the way to Cordoba in Spain, as you saw in the video. They conquer the Sassanid Empire in Persia, fight with Byzantium. They don't conquer Constantinople, but they do gain ground from the Byzantine Empire, especially in the regions where there were Arab followers of the Byzantine Empire. They were happily taken over by the Umayyads, their similar ethnicity. The Dini, or the people of the book, are allowed considerable religious freedom, but again, they pay extra taxes. So this should be in your chart under political developments, how they came to power. So the Umayyad dynasty moves the capital to Damascus in Syria. So from Mecca over to Damascus, which is today in Iraq. And Mecca, though, remains a major religious center. Consider why that might be. And you should come to the conclusion that it's still the home of the Kaaba and the destination for the Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So Umayyad strengths, this goes down in their major strengths. They are first very strong militarily, and they practice that expansionism. They made Arabic the official language of the government, so not only did the government use it, but many people learned it, so it spread Arabic throughout Dar al-Islam, the Islamic Empire. Conquered subjects were encouraged to convert. Again, the tax was a discouraging factor that made people choose to convert. The Umayyad dynasty solved the problem of succession. They stepped up as the Sunni philosophy and said, we're going to have this dynasty, etc. Now, what's interesting to consider is that they were Sunni and therefore believed that the caliph should be selected. But then once the Umayyad dynasty steps up, it has to stay within the family. And so there's a little bit of hypocrisy there that the Sunnis don't want the leader, the caliph, to be a descendant of Muhammad, but then they decide it should be a descendant of the Umayyad family. So something to consider. There's a stunning level of conquest and expansion. Again, we saw a lot of architectural feats that were created all over their empire, their vast empire. And even though the territory was growing and growing, they maintained a tightly centralized rule. So make sure you've added these things to your strengths box if you didn't do it to begin with. Just a note, the image behind is the Dome of the Rock. It's in Jerusalem, and it's believed to be the burial place of Solomon. So he's an important member, and Herod's temple too, as well, before Solomon. So he's an important figure in Judaism, which again means he's an important figure in Islam. So you can see too that the Muslims changed the decor, added some Arabic if you look up close. So that'll be something interesting we'll discuss. So the Umayyad weaknesses. First, they showed favor to fellow Arabs, giving them more rights than non-Arab converts, such as those in North Africa. And this caused a lot of unhappiness among ethnic and religious groups that were conquered by the Umayyads that were non-Arab. Particularly in North Africa and Spain and in parts of the Byzantine Empire. So again, those who didn't convert had to pay a tax for being non-Muslim. And the Umayyad caliphs became a bit self-indulgent. Over time, they took for granted the work that was put in to become a leader in the dynasty. And so they become more concerned with luxurious living than their religious prowess, religious zeal, passion. So this makes people question their intentions, whether or not they should be followed, etc. And that eventually leads to the downfall of the Umayyads. So again, a map of the Umayyad dynasty at its height. So the decline of the Umayyads, their legitimacy was disputed from the very beginning. So again, we talked about the hypocrisy of selecting your leader, but then having it be a dynasty anyways. And so in the 8th century, exactly in 750 CE, the leaders and elite lose their way. So the royal harem, which is, you can see this picture here, it's the group of women that follow around and please the prince. So it's growing. The dynasty itself abandons the frugal ways of Muhammad and earlier Muslims and kind of loses its path and its Muslim message. So a lot of people begin to question, and again, they also overexpand a bit. So soldiers were stationed in far-off lands like Iran, Persia, Spain, and so it's really hard to control such a large empire. So the decline of the Umayyad is a great story. Soldiers living in Merv, which is a town in Iran, meld with local populations, so those that are non-Arab, and eventually break off into a separate group, the Abbasids. So again, they're off a little bit far away from the capital and kind of plotting with their discontent. And then in 747, the Abbasid armies are led by Abu al-Abbas, and they challenge the Umayyad warriors. So essentially there's a battle, and the battle is at the river Zab in 750. It's massive. The Abbasids win, and so to show their good faith and that they really want to continue a strong relationship, the Abbasids invite the Umayyad family to a feast. And so they have a dinner party, and the Abbasids sit down with the entirety of the Umayyad family, almost missing one person. And they basically roll them up in Persian rugs, because again, they're over near Persia, and decapitate them and slaughter them. So one grandson who wasn't there was able to escape to Cordoba. He kind of got a tip and fled early. And so he sets up a caliphate in Cordoba, but the Umayyad Empire is over. There's not enough with that one grandson to carry on. So the Abbasids take control. So the rise of the Abbasid. The Abbasids move the capital from Damascus to Baghdad. So take a look. You can see I'm going to show you a map in a second where the movement happens. So Islam becomes a major world religion, continues to spread through North Africa, not just the most north part, but even to sub-Saharan Africa, which we'll discuss later this week. And then is also to India with the Mughal Empire. So huge territory encompassed by Islam. And the spread is made easier by a new technology in sailing. So we're going to learn about lantine sails on what are called dhows. So dhows are types of ships that are stronger and more able to travel on the Indian Ocean, and that's why Islam is able to spread so quickly across the Indian Ocean to India. So mystics, known as Sufis, which are both made up of both Shia and Sunni. So mystics are sort of like the equivalent of priests, but they're kind of seers and meant to be masters of the religion. And these mystics spread the religion far and wide. So they travel with merchants along the Silk Road, they traveled throughout India, etc. And so a religion called Sufism is created. It's a sect of Islam, but a lot of times you will see Sufism on your AP exam. And so it's important to know that Sufism was created by the mixing of some northern Indian religions, some regional further, like the Eastern Middle East religions with Islam. So that's syncretism. A type of syncretism is Sufi Muslim. So here on the map you can see Damascus circled, and our Abbasid dynasty moves their capital over to Baghdad, and this is going to become a really key center for learning. Just a quick note, because you cannot see the key. Yellow means it's under the direct rule of the Abbasids. The green means it's led by the Tawrids, who are answer to the Abbasids, but they're not directly controlled by. And then way over in Spain, you can't see, it's the Umayyad Emirate, the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain. Okay. So the Abbasid strengths. The Abbasids don't favor Arabs over non-Arabs, which means they're liked much more by non-Arab converts, people from North Africa, etc. And the Sufis, keep in mind, they're helping spread this tolerance for non-Arab, etc. So there's great hope for populist reforms at the beginning of the Abbasid Empire. It's very promising that the Abbasids are going to cater more to their people than the Umayyads did. They were less self-indulgent, etc. They developed strong urban centers with many, many universities, places for people to study, public works, etc. They still maintain that strong central authority and united front. And under the Abbasid rule, it's a cultural golden age. And so actually it's more on that in a minute. It's the next objective with our developments and accomplishments. But the Abbasids really take it to the next level culturally. So this is the Abbasid Empire at its greatest extent. You can see the dark green territories were lost early on because, again, that's where that Umayyad Caliph is over in Spain, but it's still quite large. So Abbasid weaknesses. The Abbasid weaknesses is militarily, they weren't quite as strong. They weren't practicing expansionism quite as intensely as the Umayyads. Their high point is under the Harun al-Rashid, but a civil war happens, and again, there are issues over succession after his death. So a little bit later on in the Abbasid dynasty. Again, the Abbasids last from around 750 and then much longer than our Umayyad dynasty, however. They also faced invasions, the Abbasids, by the Persians, the Seljuk Turks, and finally the Mongols in the 1300s. So we'll talk more about those invasions, especially by the Seljuk Turks and the Mongols, a bit later. But especially around 1000 and after, there were many more invasions when their military weakness was evident. So the fall of the Abbasids. I'm going to ask you to read the following quote and write down which civilization you think it describes. I'm going to speed up. So the leaders had a growing addiction to luxurious living. They cared less about war and retreated into their pleasure gardens and marble palaces. In towns and the countryside, much of the unskilled labor was left to slaves. Upper classes became increasingly pleasure-seeking and cared less about political life. Slaves took jobs from peasants in the countryside, and peasants became increasingly reliant on wealthy landlords. Much of the unskilled labor was left to slaves, often attached to prominent families as domestic servants. This, again, is describing the Abbasids. Go ahead and summarize what you would classify as the fall. the causes for the fall. And then when you're done, again, go ahead and take out the notes, the new notes, objective number 5. Go over them in detail. We'll go over them. And I'm going to pause for a while, but so you can. This objective is going to talk about major accomplishments, achievements, things, special things that the Islamic 42 and Islamic Empire. So go ahead and do that. Go ahead and answer question number 1. And you'll need to pause. To question number 2. This relates to question number 2 and what type of Islamic art is exemplified here. Go ahead and pause, but you're going to need to look it up in your textbook if you don't know. And lastly, I have a couple images. Here to support question number 3 of what is at the picture of the left, because I know it's hard to see, so I'll show it to you. But this here is an example as well. This is the picture that's showed for question number 3. Again, you'll need to refer to your book, but this was built, hint, hint, by an Ummayad leader. So, major Islamic achievements. In math, the Abbasids corrected the algebraic and geometric theories of the Greeks. So remember again, from our video clip we saw last week, that one huge accomplishment of our Islamic empires is that they went through our dark ages of Europe and collected many of the great Greek and Roman works. So those works of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Ptolemy, ideas about physics and astronomy. We would have lost all of these if it was not for our Islamic thinkers who went around and collected the Greek works and then adapted and changed them and made them better. So we have Persian literature was collected, pardon me. So more accomplishments continued. Sorry, so there were works and ideas taken from Persia, but many were taken from Europe. And so the Abbasids were able to create advancements in the use of sine, cosine, tangent. Perhaps you've been familiar with these in math. If not, you will be very soon. But they're principles of triangles, and you have different ratios of triangles. And that's what the Abbasids studied and figured out. You should definitely add the cosine, sine, and tangent notes to your guided notes. In science, they created the objective experiment. So this is similar to what you might have learned in science, where you have a goal in mind, and so you make an experiment to try to get to that goal. They also classified materials into 3 categories. So remember, there is no periodic table yet. Instead, they figured out almost everything in the world they could find was either an animal, a vegetable, or a mineral. So this was one of the first times of classifying such things. And you should be familiar, or this should be recognizable, but take a minute and think about what might be happening here. So hopefully you notice that this is an Islamic work. There is Arabic written at the top. The people are wearing turbans, etc. You might figure out that the person in the chair is a teacher, an educator of some sort, and the people sitting on the ground with the books are students. One even looks to be raising his hand. So actually, surprisingly enough, the person sitting in the chair is Aristotle, who again did not live during the Abbasid dynasty, but the Abbasids studied a great deal of Greek works. So think about why Aristotle might be depicted as a Muslim. A couple things to consider is that our Abbasids had no idea what Aristotle actually looked like. They're living, again, hundreds of years after Aristotle. So why wouldn't they paint him to look like them? Additionally, painting Aristotle, and what Aristotle is holding is a planet. It's a astronomical tool. And so painting Aristotle too, like themselves, makes him more approachable, more believable, etc. So they might have been trying to accomplish multiple things here. So achievements considered, continued. The Abbasids manufactured steel for swords and made a much stronger steel that was purer and less likely to bend and break. They created medical encyclopedias, so they started to test and understand different illnesses and see patterns and find anecdotes, etc. And they preserved Western culture as Europe became decentralized, again, through the works of the Greeks and the Romans. They went around, they sent scholars to collect all these works and preserve them and save them, and then translated them into Arabic. And during later wars, the Crusades, which we'll get to, the Europeans rediscovered their own heritage in the Islamic libraries. The Dark Ages had totally lost touch with the thinkings and learnings of the Greeks and the Romans. And so it was actually thanks to our Islamic empires that those ideas were preserved and the Europeans found them once again, which will later lead to the Renaissance, but more on that later. So the Umayyad civilization used gold and silver coins as common currency. Again, the value, the coins weren't actually worth different amounts like ours with our quarter and our dime and our nickel. Instead, they were weighed, and so they were just worth as much as they weighed in gold or their weight in silver. Just a fun fact. So the Abbasid dynasty's golden age. Take a look at what's going on in this picture here. So this is the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. And the people are studying, you see their compasses, or astrolabe, sorry, it's called an astrolabe, and they're studying astronomy. The Abbasids were very, very interested in the stars and the sky, etc. They adopt Indian numerals and make them into Arabic numerals, which are the numerals we use today. They develop medical encyclopedias, translate the Greek philosophy, Socrates, Plato, etc. And this is known as the House of Wisdom. So you need to watch this video link separately and take notes on in the box. That's the Islamic accomplishments video. Complete 2 specific medical advancements and examples of advancements in math and science we can still see today. This is in your email, by the way. So the Abbasid Golden Age, again, there were major building projects. The first universities were developed, so large scale people going to school and getting higher education. There was a great deal of peace and tolerance for other religious customs. The production of steel and swords makes the armies dominant. Again, China had steel, but the Abbasids figured out how to make it purer ore and melt out the impurities so that the steel could be lighter and stronger than that of the Chinese. More on the Golden Age, you're going to watch the video from 4:58 to 7:30 and take notes at the bottom here. And then when you're done, you can, so pause this, start the video, and when you're done, you can turn the page for our generalization practice.